Well, thank you once again for joining us on Money Matters. I am Folashade Ogrinde. In the past 1 week, the country's economy and political climate saw a number of developments. Firstly, CBN's monetary policy meeting had a number of interesting outcomes. But what stood out for many is the announcement by the Apex Bank Governor Godwin Emefiele that the CBN is investigating Aboki FX, an online website that publishes dollar to naira rates at the parallel market. Another development worth noting is Emefiele's stand that forex sale ban to BDCs remain, despite expectations in some quarters that the CBN would rescind its decisions due to weakening of the naira caused by dollar scarcity. Now, in addition to these issues, President Muhammadu Buhari has asked the National Assembly to approve fresh external loans of $4.05 billion and 210 million euros. Now, in the letter addressed to the upper and lower legislative chambers, he says the fresh loans will help improve the economy. And not forgetting, the senators passed the medium-term expenditure framework, MTEF, retaining the oil benchmark for the 2022 budget at $57 per barrel, as well as some other options which I'll be discussing with the senior economist at SPM Professionals, Mr. Paul Alaje. Thank you so much for your time on the program. Now, let's begin with the medium-term expenditure framework. What do you make of the assumptions that were retained? That is the oil benchmark of $57 per barrel, crude oil production at 1.88 million barrels per day, and exchange rate of 410 naira to a dollar. How realistic do you think these assumptions really are?
Well, when you look at what is going on at the global market, you may want to say that it is still expected that there will be stability as vaccination increases. We're expecting some level of stability in terms of global economic growth, unlike what we have. So it is just fine for the Nigerian authority to perhaps retain rates and expectation along what was obtainable in 2021. 2021 is seeing a steady recovery from the recession that we had. And when you look at it, $57 per barrel, even though we're expecting that the rate should be much higher, but that would be a good place to start. That's looking at a barrel and over 1.8 million barrels a day. It's also very fine. And when you also consider other projections, you see that for now, government seems to still sit on the fence because we may not be expecting something to be worse off than what we had in 2020, what we are having in 2021, even though we can also not guarantee a significant improvement in 2022 and beyond, looking at from today. However, in near term or in near future, when things become better, government, authorities may change what those rates are.
Now, the Senate retained the federal government's 2022 revenue projection of 8.36 trillion naira, an expenditure of 13.98 trillion naira, leaving a projected fiscal deficit estimate of 5.62 trillion naira. Now, is this something we should be concerned about?
This is something we should be worried about. 5 trillion 2021, 5 trillion 2022. Put those together, 10 trillion. Well, let's assume we're in 2023. Add that to the current debt profile of 35 trillion. You are talking of 45 trillion GDP. When you look at the GDP figures, you will really be worried and you'll be disturbed that we continue to borrow. Because this is simply saying that, come on, in 2022, we'll still be getting perhaps treasury bills, bond, euro bond, and also be getting foreign loans to support government gap in borrowing. So if you are looking at approximately 5 trillion naira on an annual basis, if you do that projection for the next 10 years, you are talking about 50 trillion naira. When you look at Nigerian budget of 13 trillion, what will you borrow in 5 years? That's already telling you a lot. If you can put the math together, at the beginning of this year, you are looking at about less than 30 trillion. Already, DMO released approximately 35 trillion naira. So, and when you ask, there are countries that have been borrowing and they have even borrowed more than Nigeria. So what is the difference? Why should we be worried? Because I've seen argument upon argument and people that have approached to say, oh, economists, you need to explain, why should we borrow, why shouldn't we borrow? And I said, well, answers to some of your questions have been provided many years ago. There are 3 standard conditions for a country to know whether it should borrow more or less, and the 3 must be satisfied. These 3 conditions, 2 of them are traditional and 1 of them are more recent finding that economists around the globe have come to accept. Even countries with trillions or no debt at all should ask whether such countries should continue to borrow or should not even borrow at all. What's the first condition? What is debt to GDP? This is as old as we can imagine. Debt to GDP in Nigeria is less than 40%, which means there is still few allowance, which perhaps authority is planning to say we may even still be borrowing in 2022. But this condition is necessary but not sufficient. Nobody should borrow with necessary condition without considering what economists call the sufficient condition. The question now is, what is sufficient? Which is the question we should ask. It is debt service versus revenue. Debt service versus revenue. When you look at our debt versus revenue, some report shows over 90%. Mid-year, we're seeing about 50-something plus percent. That is the proportion of our revenue that we have spent to service debt. So does it make sense when all we earn today are used to service debt, not for capital expenditure, not for recurrent expenditure? Definitely, it does no longer make economic sense to keep borrowing. Borrowing is necessary condition, but it's not sufficient condition. And if it's not sufficient condition, we should not be borrowing. And you may want to ask me, what is the corridor with which debt service to revenue should be? It's about 30%. Once you are doing above 30% of your revenue, then you are not in a comfortable position to keep borrowing. So countries that are doing more than 30 to 33%, they are already they're tending to the position where they may need to now have more opportunity costs, money they would have used to construct roads, money they would have used for recurrent expenditure, and so on and so forth. All of those will be used to service it. And this is the note of warning. The foreign loans we are having these days are not what we can be forgiven of. I will repeat myself. The foreign loans that we are borrowing these days don't expect forgiveness, because they are commercial loans. They are not bilateral loans. They are not multilateral in nature. They are purely commercial. They are bonds, Euro bonds. Owners of bonds, those who have received the bond certificate from a country, will certainly go for their money. They are not as structured, as organized as we have with bilateral and multilateral loan. And when you look at countries that got some level of consideration, when we were in the midst of COVID in 2020, the impact on Nigerian debt profile was very minimal, because a larger proportion of our foreign loans are not bilateral or multilateral. So what we have is, to a large extent, what we had was commercial loan, and this is very important for us to note that if you borrow in that market, be ready to pay. That is just it. So if you know you will not pay, there is no point for you borrowing. Now, the last but very important, perhaps the most important, is what is the impact of debt? What is the impact of debt? Now, Nigeria has borrowed with the average growth rate of about 20%. Meanwhile, the real economy has grown in the last 5 years, and the real average economy itself has grown with less than 2%. Now, compare the two. 5 years, average of 20%, and you have 2 years, you have 5 years economic growth rate of less than 2%. Where is the impact? For an economy that borrowed with an average of 20%, the impact ordinarily should not have been less than 7 to 10%. So it means we are not really seeing impact. But let me put a caveat. That does not mean government has not borrowed and we cannot see anything at all. That is why you can see some level of growth. We have seen Sukuk 3, which is, I think, somewhere on the island in Lagos. I've seen the first Sukuk bond around Gwagwalada road construction. I've even seen Chinese loan, what we have used for Lagos-Ibadan rail project, and quite a number of them. But you see, the impact of all of this is not sufficient enough, because we are relying on loan. And when you look at 13 trillion and you are going to borrow nearly 5 trillion, and that's so significant source of income. That loan is more than what entire oil and gas sector, Nigeria is all producing country, what oil sector will give us. It is even more than that. That means our largest dependent for servicing, for expenditure, is perhaps what we are getting from loans, and we need to be very careful. If loan and oil, will be debating, and we really don't know which one comes first. that means we need to do more in the near future, as it has to do with generating revenue, which is the real problem.
Now, speaking of revenue, Mr.
Alaje,
yes, you raised some points earlier that I would say are quite scary. Speaking of Eurobonds and how these people would definitely come back for their money, whether Nigeria likes it or not, but still on deficit. What viable options does Nigeria have as an alternative to perpetual borrowing?
Now, a lot of options that we have in our hands, and government have started demonstrating some, and I hope that we're going to see increase in those demonstrations of alternative to revenue, alternative to borrowing. One of those alternatives remain considering public-private partnership. I don't know, for those who live in Lagos, they've seen Perpetual the Expressway, perhaps one of the best road. I mean, the construction is still on, by the way. One of the best roads recently constructed, and I want to see the replication of that on Abuja-Kaduna Expressway. I want to see the replication of most of the things that government is borrowing money for. So what have we done? Government is now going to issue tax credit, which means, don't worry, you have more or less spent this money, and we are saying you pay your tax in advance. So corporate income tax is given, and federal government will really to a large extent benefit from those, and the private sector will also benefit. Maybe will come with some level of discount, some amount of discount, I beg your pardon. And you're going to see it's also expedite economic activity around those regions. That on one hand. On second hand, we have also seen that National Bureau of Statistics continue to report sectors that have grown during the pandemic, and they are still growing even till today. The challenge we have is what revenue is coming to government from all of these growing sectors, namely telecom, namely banking, namely ICT, etc., etc. But we are not seeing significant increase in revenue of government. That on the other hand, so rather than growing, in some cases, revenue going to government for a sector that is growing is actually being depleted. This is why government need to think again and say we need to follow the money. Those, you see, when there is economic quagmire, economic recession, no naira will disappear from Nigeria. It doesn't mean that money will start disappearing or rapture for money has come. No, it only means that money will shift to less and less people with more and more knowledge to make money. And those that has less and less knowledge will now have less and less income. So government will now change attention to see those who are making more, so that more in taxes can go to Nigeria. How just can we compare ourselves to the likes of America and so on and so forth, who are taxing significant proportion of their GDP? As we speak today, tax to GDP is less than 10%. So I'm not saying we should start taxing Okada rider. A governor tried it, and some of the tax people on the road were stoned, in one of the north central state. That is not the way to go. Certainly the way to go is to look at those giants who are making this revenue, and the demand side are hopelessly dependent on them, and they can make a lot of income. So quite a lot of money could be made. And if I can put figure to it based on SPM research findings, federal government, I don't mean the federation, federal government alone can do up to 20 trillion naira in revenue. Mark you, what is submitted from MTEF is just 13 trillion. I'm talking about 20 trillion naira. And states can even do more than that. I mean states, 36 states of the Federation and the FCT can grow to about 40 to about 50 trillion naira. That is when this economy, we say we can now invest in mass. Imagine we are putting investment from government, public sector, both private and public sector, putting investment, up to about 60 trillion naira on this economy. You are going to start seeing major road construction. You are going to be seeing infrastructure evident in rail. You're going to be seeing capital projects. You're going to be seeing education, health. You're going to be seeing massive employment, mopping up unemployment figures. You're going to see provision of more power supply. That will be private sector initiative. This is what we need. I am sorry if you cannot figure out how to get this revenue or to partner with private sector significant enough for us to spend approximately 20 to about 60 trillion, 20 trillion to federal government, and 60 trillion naira minimum, and I mean minimum. In the real sense, we should do up to 100 trillion for 10 years for us to start lifting people and meet the projection of Mr. President of 100 million people. What we have today is additional 7 million people have been plunged into poverty. And these are not my figures. World Bank said so. Recent reports by NBS and UNDP also show that more and more people have lost their job. 33% and more is unemployment figure. So when you look at this, revenue coming from public sector, government needs to become more innovative. Those that are poor cannot be overtaxed, and that is not the way to go. So the way to go is those that the demand side have hopelessly depend on and continue to make money from the sector. How can they support the sector by paying their taxes in form of revenue to government?
Indeed, Mr. Alaji, and that's a very big question mark that we hope that the federal government will give answers to, and as well as brilliant minds such as you. But we've had a very robust first half conversation, but still on the front burner of our discussion today is the outcome of the CBN MPC meeting. But that will be right after this break. Do stay with us.
Corruption not in my country.
Hello, Alahaji. Right now I'm in Abuja. No. Hello, Adamu. Right now I'm in Kano. Yes. When I get back, I'll just call you. Look, what is wrong with you? I'm talking on the phone and you are gesticulating and doing. What's wrong with you?
Daddy, where exactly are we as we speak?
Are you alright? This is Lagos.
Well, you just lied to someone that we're in Abuja.
Keep quiet. Who told you can tell an elderly person is lying?
Daddy, you just lied. And by lying, you're raising corrupt children for the future of Nigeria. That is corruption, not in my country.
Corruption not in my country.
Well, welcome back to the program. If you're just joining us, I've been discussing some of the MTEF FSP assumptions okayed by the Senate, and with the senior economist at SPM Professionals, Mr. Paul Alaji. Thank you so much for standing by. Yeah, we're switching gears now, and on the conversation, the CBN governor at the last MPC meeting disclosed that the Apex Bank is investigating Aboki FX for illegal activity that undermines the economy. Now, would you help explain how the parallel markets exchange rate posted by Aboki FX influences the performance of the Naira?
Well, it's important to play a balanced conversation when the issue of the MPC led by Central Bank Governor Mr. Godwin Emefiele and that popular website for gathering data for what is happening at the parallel market. It's very important to play a balanced, to have a balanced view and not to consider whether we need to take the CBN governor to the market and watch, or we should take Aboki FX MD to the market and watch. I think, from my opinion, I've observed the issue very well. And I think that, on one hand, when you consider what Mr. Governor Emefiele have said, I think, in my own opinion this time, I feel that what Mr. Godwin Emefiele is saying, this is the way I understand it, because people have a platform that gathers information. Those that are speculating on Naira, they continue to hold, irrespective of all the intervention program Central Bank has been bringing to the market. It's not yielding a result because of the level of belief that Nigerians and people have on that website. So, and you have seen it, I've read it in many reports. People say, according to Aboki FX, so it's technically becoming unregulated but legitimized, even in the media. So this, I think, is a major challenge. Central Bank Authority, even though I don't work with them, this is what I think is a major challenge. I will look at it very carefully, you know. But now, look, considering the other side on the part of the Central Bank and, of course, the leadership, Mr. Godwin Emefiele, what should be done? I think beyond climbing down on Aboki FX, which is the first, which is the second or the third thing, even before all of those things, Aboki FX started sometimes in 2018, but before Aboki FX, we are continuing to see a downward trend in the strength of Naira. What should we do? It is high time for authorities to know that even though we stop Aboki FX, we don't know if another one will come up tomorrow. And that is why we need to run our economy properly. And this is outside. This is not outside. This is not just what Mr. Godwin Emefiele alone can do. In this regard, Mr. Emefiele, we therefore need to work with fiscal authority, or maybe fiscal authority and trade authority. We work with Mr. Emefiele to ensure that Nigeria improves on exports. We cannot just be exporting crude gas and sesame seed and expect that we are going to have sufficient FX. Look at the trade reports that answers it all by National Bureau of Statistics. Nigeria keeps importing raw material because our economy is primary in nature, and until we can have an economic transformer that will transform our economy from primary nature to secondary nature, you will still see huge unemployment, you will still have high level of poverty, hunger and deprivation, and sometimes inflation will come in its numbers very high indeed. But at that time, when we are able to provide some level of solution by transforming our economy from primary to secondary, and we can export secondary products, outside Nigeria, import input that when they get to the rest of the country out of it.
Now let's talk about the BDCs. Some experts have said that banning sales of forex to BDCs isn't the solution, but the CBN insists that the ban stays. What do you make of this?
Well, when you say banning sales of forex to BDC is not the solution, I am neither
some experts. That's not my word now. Some experts have said that.
Okay, so those experts that say banning sales of BDC banning sales of FX to BDC is not the solution. Clearly, because even now that we are banning it, the value continues to go up. So perhaps that's an effect. We have not really tackled the real cause. What is the cause? The cause is that many people don't believe in the currency naira. And it's very unfortunate that a country has a own currency, but many will prefer to hold another currency, expecting that currency to be weakened and perhaps die so that they can make gain. Let me quickly say this. Anyone doing that is actually affecting himself or herself more. And this is the reason. When naira gets weaker, truly, you are going to make more in your bank account, or when you go to the big market to exchange. But watch this, your house rent will increase, your bag of rice will increase, your mobile phone will increase, the cost of bottled water will increase, your flight ticket will increase. Eventually, that extra will not be sufficient. And this is the engagement central bank needs to come out with. This is how I expect central bank to engage people rather than just confronting. You may want to confront on one hand, but you need public education for people to know that by working against the naira, because you live in an economy and what decide the economy is naira, so the more naira goes down, the worse your economy will be. Because you also cannot have access to trillions and billions, perhaps some millions of dollars. And if you do, authority will question you. So the little $1,000, $10,000, $50,000, $20,000 you are keeping, hoping that the value will go bad and you are going to go back to exchange, you are not just damaging the economy, you are even damaging yourself and your relations. So should central bank stop BDC? My opinion is this. Central bank have said BDC should relate with commercial bank. If commercial bank will make FX available to BDC, I don't see anything wrong with that. But if commercial bank is not making the FX available to BDC at the rate agree with central bank, then there is a big issue. This is the reason. When you give dollars directly to BDC, it becomes very difficult for central bank to trace. It becomes very difficult. So you see the number of BDCs almost quadruple in few years. We are asking, with all of these 10 million intervention, $15 million intervention, why has the market not balanced? It simply means the demand side for dollars seems to be more than the supply, either through speculative reasons or because our exports are sufficiently poor. For me, the real solution is a government policy, fiscal, trade, and monetary authorities must agree, and we have to start seeing that, not just to take budgets to National Assembly or take MTEF to National Assembly, but you must take how do we want to promote exports in the next 3 years with action plan. and start projecting by how much will Naira improve in value. If you are not seeing that, I'm afraid, no matter what you say and the good policy we put in place, because we don't produce enough from the hair our women put on, they call woman hair, even though they are human themselves, but they still buy human hair and it's imported, to the worst one where people impregnate their wife, export the wife, and import their children back to Nigeria. Is that sad? So until we start building healthcare system, we start building infrastructure, in our economy, people will continue to think by protecting themselves, keeping their money in dollars. And unfortunately, sometimes outside the banking sector, which makes it worse. So I'm afraid we may continue to see continuous fall in Naira until authorities start engaging the people via civil conversation and also having robust intervention in the market that will be supported with huge exports and an import substitution. I'm afraid you may continue to see a major fall in the value of Naira.
Well, Mr. Alaji, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your contributions on the program.
Thank you so very much for having me.
And it's a wrap on the program. Thank you for watching. I am Folashade Ogrinde. See you next week. Bye-bye.